About a mile from its entrance, we passed a large Indian village, the home of the Takultas, a powerful band of most predatory habits, and generally at war with the different tribes north and south of them. They own a large fleet of canoes, a great many slaves, and a scalp and plunder all they can lay hands on. For a distance of 14 miles, Discovery Passage is much the same width until, reaching Menzies Bay where the rapids commence. At the base of these rapids, the channel, barely a quarter of a mile wide, suddenly opens into a large pond-like space. The tide rushes down the narrow passage at the rate of 10 knots an hour, and to keep up through it was much as our little steamer could accomplish, panting and struggling and sometimes hardly moving at others. She was carried violently against the shore until, by slow degrees, she breasted the current and got safely through. I could not help wondering how Captain Vancouver ever managed to get his ship up to this terrible place, so difficult even when added by the power of the steam. Above the rapids, the passage again widens to Point Chatham, the northwest termination of Discovery Passage. We puffed by Thurlow Island, divided from Valid's Island by the Norrolds Canal, and anchor in a snug harbor named Slop Anchorage. We start again at the sunup, the fifth morning since leaving Victoria. As we steamed steadily along through the Johnson Strait, I could recall to my remembrance no scenery that was comparable. In wild grandeur and picturesque grouping to the scenery on my left, the coastline of Vancouver Island presented a series of small, projecting headlands. The bays and creeks between, seldom rippled by the breeze, are very Edens for wildfowl. In the background, the hills rise sharp and conical, at this time crowned with snow, but all alike in density timbered. In the distance, Hardwick Island, like a floating emerald, hid the water beyond it. To the right, highlands of all sizes and shapes so thick that one might suppose it had rained islands at some point or other. On the least of them grew pine trees, any of which could have made a mainmast for the largest ship ever built. I have again and again threaded the intricate passage through the Lake of 1,000 Islands in the great St. Lawrence, but I say without fear of contradiction that the scenery from Chatham Point to the mouth of the Nimkish River is wilder, bolder, and in every respect more beautiful, lovely as I admit the Canadian scenery to be. The ship channel hugs the shore of Vancouver Island, passing close to Cormorant, Haddington, and Malcolm Islands to the west of Nimkish River, navigable for canoes in considerable distance. This stream is used by the Hudson Bay traders to reach the western side of Vancouver Island. Ascending it in canoes as far as practicable, almost 2 days walking brings them to the Nootka Sound. At the mouth of the river, I saw the village of the Nimkish Indians, situated on a tableland overhanging the sea and inaccessible save by ascending a vertical cliff of smooth rock. A feat nothing but a fly could manage, unaided, but the Indians have a ladder, made of cedar bark rope, which they can haul up and lower at will. The ladder up the place is impregnable. Save themselves, they can quietly bowl over their enemies and sink their canoes. These Minkish Indians speak of another tribe that they call Swakua Latuk, who have never seen or traded with white people. Their story, as interpreted for me by Mr. Moffat, the chief trader at Fort Rupath, who told me he quite believed it to be true, was as follows. In crossing over to the west side of the island on a warpath, that Nimkis discovered these Indians by accident, took several of them prisoners whom they subsequently used as slaves, taking also skins and what other property they had worth plundering. They are said to live on the edge of the lake, and subsist principally on deer and bear, and such fish as they can take in the lake. They own no canoes, neither do they know the use of firearms, their only weapons being the bow, arrow, and spear. The wind came on to blow as we left this interesting spot, and soon increased to a gale from the southeast, making the otter rock most unpleasantly in the cradle of the deep. About 10 a.m. we ran into Beaver Harbor, our destination, this so-called harbor, being nothing more than an open roadstead, is disagreeably rough, with heavy sea rolls angrily in, dashing in foamy breakers on the rocky coast. We anchor about a mile from shore, the captain deeming it unsafe to venture nearer. To announce our arrival, a gun is to be fired. This, I observed, was rather a service of danger to the sailor who had to touch it off, as it was just an equal chance whether the bulk of the charge came through the barrel or the touch hole. The latter being become so capricious from the rust and long usage as to necessitate the employment of an enormously long wand and a piece of light and slow match tied to the end of it, all hands having cleared away and carefully concealed themselves. The wand slowly appears from a secure hiding place, and the wheezy bang proclaims all safe. The report was still echoing through the distant hills when countless tiny specks were discernible, dancing over the waves like birds. On they came, a perfect shoal of them, nearer and nearer, all evidently bound for the ship. I could make out clearly that these specks were canoes filled with Indians. By this time, our boats were lowered. How I got into it, I never clearly remember. I have a dim recollection of descending a rope with great rapidity, and finding myself sprawling in the bottom, and being dragged up by the captain, much after the fashion adopted by clowns in a pantomime to reinstate the prostrate pantaloon upon his legs. At any rate, I was safe, and the boat, propelled by four sturdy rowers, neared the shore. On looking around, I observed the cannons had all turned towards us, and we were soon surrounded by the most extraordinary fleets I had ever beheld. The cannons were of all sizes, varying from those used for war purposes, holding 30 men, to the cockleshell paddled by a squaw, with the exception of a bit of skin or an old blanket tied around the waist. The Indians were all perfectly nude. Their long black hair hung in tangled elf locks down their backs, their faces and bodies painted in most fantastic patterns, with red and white keeping steadily along with us. They continually revealed their feelings by giving utterance to the most wild and fiendish yells that ever came from human throats. As we neared the landing, I could see the chief trader of the Hudson Bay Company, conspicuously white amidst a group of Indians, waiting to receive us. The boat grated on the shingle some distance from the beach, white with spray. "Surely you don't expect me to go ashore like a seal?" I apparently inquired of the captain. Before he had time to reply, four powerful Indians, up to their waists in water, fisted me out of the boat, and two, who, taking my heels and to my shoulders, they bore me safely to shore. Having handed my letters of introduction from His Excellency the Governor to the chief trader, I was presented to the chiefs as Keast, Great Chief, one of the King George's men. So we shook hands, and I attempted to move towards the fort. It was not to be done. To use the mild terms, I was mobbed. Old and young rushed to shake hands with me. Had I been a pump on a desert, surrounded by thirst-famished Indians, in each arm a handle they could not have more vigorously plied. Being rescued at last by the combined efforts of trader and captain, I was marched into the fort. The grate shut with a heavy clang, and most thankful was I to be safe from any further demonstrations of friendship. Evening passed rapidly and pleasantly. Mine host was a thorough sportsman, full of anecdote and hospitable to a fault. Awakening early, I wandered out and up into the bastion of the fort. The sun was creeping from behind in ragged peaks of the Cascade Mountains, tinting with rosy lit. There are snow-clad summits the wild wind had lulled, all were gone off to sea on some boisterous errand. The harbor, quite smooth, looked like burnished silver. There was a wild grandeur about the scene that awoke feelings of awe rather than admiration. Everywhere vast piles of craggy mountains clad from the snow line to the sea, with dense pine forests. Not an open grassy spot, or even a naked mass of rock, peeped out to break the fearful monotony of these interminable hills.